I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's like 4:17, and so welcome. It's Monday, March 11th. We're marching right through March. Pretty good. And so just before we start, I know I'm going to turn my cell phone off, and just a reminder, if you want to turn it off, that you can do that, or if you have to keep it on for some important communication, that's an adult thing, and we need to do that. And so, and again, I know that sometimes people have to leave for something else that they're going to. I know tomorrow I've got to be out the door by 6:30. Well, is tomorrow the time where we have to be short anyway? Oh, okay. So tomorrow we're really going to rock and roll. Okay. So anybody else need any clarification, insight? I want to welcome those that are here to observe and those that might be watching on YouTube. So again, this is the Education Committee on Monday, March 11th. And we always start off with informational meetings from our Assistant Superintendent's report. So I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Jeff Horton.
All right, thank you very much. Good to see everybody at the Education Committee tonight. Just starting out with some site celebrations. We have the Alternative Learning Center in Dunfield High School. Both sites have had staff working very hard on what's called a comprehensive needs assessment. They've been working with the Regional Centers of Excellence in the state of Minnesota to analyze their data and to develop a plan which was then submitted to myself, and then we passed on to the state of Minnesota on using evidence-based practices to improve learning for students. Their staffs have been working very hard throughout the fall, winter, and now into the spring. We have submitted those plans, and so just a shout out to the Alternative Learning Center staff and the Dunfield staff for all of their hard work on doing that. It's a lot of data, it's a lot of time to go through that process, and what's different from in the past is this was due March 1st, and our other sites have not had this done until towards the end of the school year, so they really had a tighter timeline and really have dedicated a lot of this year for doing planning things. And so just want to celebrate all the hard work they did around looking at their data and coming up with some evidence-based practices to improve student learning. We did do a site walkthrough between last meeting and this meeting. And the site walkthrough we did was at Lincoln Park Middle School. They are doing some work on developing a new practice profile, and it was very comprehensive, very in-depth, and we didn't have an opportunity to actually trial it yet because they were just getting to that point. But it's very in-depth, takes a lot of look at trauma-informed practices. It takes a look at restorative practices and how that looks when you walk into the building and into a classroom. And so they're just starting to get into that with their staff. Really exciting stuff, very thorough and comprehensive. So they're going to be working through that. So we're excited for future site visits and being able to look at how that tool is being used in at their site. Some highlights. Just want to highlight Safe and Welcoming Schools, which is part of our World's Best Workforce Plan. In particular, just want to touch on Alice again. Most of our sites have done their their third lockdown, which we've asked them to do the barricade piece of Alice. And so what that looks like is if we were in a room such as this one right here, we would look at the doors and how can we do more than just lock our door? And that might be taking chairs and piling them up. We've taught strategies about taking a belt loop and using those to help hold doors shut. And we went through some training scenarios with staff, and they have now done some things with the students. Some of our sites are still working through those pieces, and that's okay. We know that this is a process, and this is new learning for all of us, and we're all have different comforts. So those sites that have not completed that are going to be doing so very shortly. And once that's completed, then we'll be looking to the next piece, which will be counter, and we'll be talking about what that means as age appropriate as well. Again, we do not do any swarming at the elementary schools, and so we do not teach that. We do not encourage that. But once they do hit middle school, that would be a piece of counter. And counter is not just doing the swarming. That's just one small piece of it and one option within that strategy. So we're making progress there. Overall feedback has been very positive. And I don't want to touch too much on some of the listening sessions, but a theme that has come out is just a lot of excitement around safety, and so I think ALICE definitely plays to that. For the continuous improvement process, we worked with a team earlier this fall and into winter to review the continuous improvement process in our district, and we have adopted the state documents, which are in line with the Every Student Succeeds Act, or known as the North Star Plan in Minnesota. Those continuous improvement documents will be used with all of our sites as we go through our comprehensive needs assessment this spring, and they will be developing a school improvement plan, which will be turned in by June 30th this year. So really excited to go through that process, start analyzing our data, identifying our evidence-based practices, and having plans around that. Some work that we've been doing just with diversifying our staff, we continue to have conversations. I recently had a meeting with community, with our own staff, with some other providers, and we really talked about how we can partner between all of our agencies and government, city, school district, and different funding sources to promote diversification of our staff. And we're very lucky to have our Pathways to Teaching. We're lucky to have the paraprofessional assessment, the parapro. And so we're looking at ways that we can really continue to support staff of color in their development, both on the recruitment side and then getting people into the teacher courses potentially. So we're still early in those conversations, but there seems to be a lot of excitement around there, and I think we're getting some traction. So I'm excited to see where those go. We have a follow-up meeting here in a little bit, and so more information to come on that. I don't want to get too far out in front, but I think there's potentially some emerging things that we can do to really support diversifying our staff. So we're pretty excited about that. Recently, William House and I were able to present at the University of Minnesota at the 2019 Summit on Equity, Race, and Ethnicity, and we did our T-form, and so we took a group of people through the T-form. We talked a little bit about the history. We actually did a scenario in which we tried to walk them through a process, and we received a lot of questions, and it was really interesting and fun to do that. And we talked about how this is a tool that can be used both for organizational change, but also small level change too. And so very wide group of people that were there, but it was exciting to get their questions. It was really exciting to hear what their thoughts were, and I think that there was some great learning there. So we're really excited to do that. Lastly, for highlights, we recently had our QSC and QLT meetings. These are a really important part of what we do as a school district. It's an opportunity for us to sit down as administrators and teachers and talk about what's going on through the labor management process. So we did have those meetings, elementary QLT, which was specific to elementary, and then QSC, which is kind of the overarching group for the QLT meetings. And just really always valuable feedback that we received there, and we do use that in supporting our decision-making processes and to get feedback on things that we're doing and how we can do things better. So we just recently had that meeting, and that was great as well. The last piece is just a shout out. It was just to public schools. There's going to be a lot of things that you're going to be seeing coming up around public schools and just celebrating that and wearing red. And I just want to give a shout out to public education. For me, I think the beauty in public education is that we welcome everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. We're excited to have you. And when a student shows up, we say, all right, how can we serve and support you? And we always love doing that. And I think that's just the beauty of public education, and that's why I'm here. I think that's why a lot of us are here, and just want to give a shout out to public education and public schools. And that concludes the Assistant Superintendent's report for March.
Does anyone on our board have questions or comments, feedback for Assistant Superintendent? So I have just two things. The Alternative Learning Center is here, ALC. Does Denfeld have some Alternative Learning Center components?
The Alternative Learning Center is housed here, that is correct. And so if you're a member of the ALC, you would be here. We do have school-within-school programming at Denfeld.
Oh, okay.
And that is actually associated with the Alternative Learning Center. And so actually we're currently having some discussions about that right now and how we can continue to make that best work for kids. And
I just want to show you my appreciation that Alice is still moving forward. I know we talked a lot about that in the spring and had some, strong community input. So, and I like the idea that there's pieces being, so this lockdown is having the barriers, and next lockdown will have one more. I think that's a nice way to roll it out. I know some were probably looking for a little bit like a quick fix, and it's not. It's a complicated but necessary safety and security and programming. So I appreciate that, and I think that it was really great that you and Mr. Howes presented our tool equity kit. Is that what is TEA? It's what are the acronyms really spelling out?
The tool for equity and accountability. Accountability.
Okay.
Yep.
So, and I just think that's really cool that Duluth is showcasing an element that was developed here, and I think it'll help us gain even more feedback as to how better to use that tool, and just working with our statewide people. So thank you for presenting at that summit and being invited. I'm sure you had to kind of apply, or you had to put yourself out there, so thank you. So we're going to move on to Curriculum Director Ms. Netland's report. Thanks.
Thank you. So the updates I have for you this month are regarding standards at the state level. We've got a lot of changes kind of going on in the works, and also I wanted to provide you with the schedule for standards review at the state level, kind of as a reminder of kind of why our own district adoption cycle is paced out the way it is, and that is in direct relationship with the Minnesota Standards Review schedule. So we lag a couple of years behind that, giving them time to figure out what the new standards are going to look like, and then time for planning how we're going to go about implementing those. So for science, the first draft I had mentioned just briefly this fall had come out, and first drafts normally are really rough drafts, and so a lot of changes happen. And the second draft has come out, and there are some big changes that, should they stay through the final draft, that have implications for graduation requirements, for which grade levels different subject matter is taught in, and have then implications for our curriculum adoption cycle. So just as a heads up with that, the third and final draft has not yet been released. Feedback closed on the second draft just at the end of February. So right now the group is working to review the feedback and make any changes that they think should be changed. And then from there, the third draft is released. I believe generally they shoot for like May. So once we have that draft, I've asked our content specialist for science to come in and share with you kind of the specific changes that are going to be coming and then what that means for us, just as a heads up. So I did put a link into that second draft to the science standards. They are on MDE's website. You can read them if you have some free time. They're kind of lengthy, but one of the most notable changes that are current in the draft, I will just give you a heads up, is they are looking at eliminating physical science as a 9th grade course and moving that down into 8th grade. And then earth science will take a more prominent role, being in both high school and 6th grade. So some significant change for teachers in those grade levels and students should these move forward as they're currently drafted. So just some heads up with that. And then next up in our rotation cycle is English Language Arts. And they're just getting started with this. So currently there is a survey open through MDE for people to weigh in on the current standards as they are in place. Strengths, weaknesses, what they think. I haven't finished my own survey yet, but I've been looking through it. It's lengthy. So they're looking for feedback. That's through March 20th. And then from there, they will be pulling a team together looking at doing standards revision for next school year. So just as a heads up for that. And then that kind of, go ahead.
I should ask, Member Oswald, you want to chime in on the science thing?
I did. I just wanted to comment that seems to be moving backwards because, when I was at Morgan Park Junior High School in 9th grade, we had earth science in 9th grade. So it seems to have made its way backwards somehow.
And my question was just, did you just say that English Language Arts is due for updated standards starting next year?
Yes, so they'll begin the process like they're currently in for science this year. Right. So it generally takes a whole school year to do the revision process, and then those will get approved, And then there's an implementation schedule generally, so it's a few-year process for giving districts time to review those, compare them to what they currently have in place, make revisions, purchase materials as needed, and then roll that out with professional development to staff. So it's definitely a multi-year process, and the process is just going to be getting started for English next year. To speak to the question about earth science too, just for that, part of the conversation that came up around that was that in this last rendition of the standards, it had kind of gotten lost, and so there was desire to make sure it was emphasized. Other questions? Okay, moving on to the second part that kind of follows along with that is I just wanted to give you a heads up later on the agenda today. We'll hear an update from the music content area who are working on doing this review of standards work for their area and making recommendations based on that. And then in April we'll have art, and then budgets for those will both come with recommendations for approval to you at the next April meeting, just for both of those content areas. We broke them up for presentations so you've got less to chew on at a time. And then I did attach the district review and adoption cycle too, so you could see how there is that couple-year delay with review process implementation.
Member Oswald.
I click on the link for cycle and it won't pull up the document on my computer.
Mine didn't either, but you had sent it in an email earlier.
I'm able to access the document. So.
Mine says no connection.
Let me check the share permissions and we'll see. You should have access.
Well, I'll have Mr. Bart over there look at it later.
Are you logged in on the public side or private side?
While we're troubleshooting that, I'll just give you an overview of what it is and then. So it's laid out by subject area with the proposed year that the standards are revised and passed in legislation, and then when they're implemented, when they're scheduled for the next review stage, and then the estimated years of full implementation at the state level. And then you'll see below that ours kind of follows. And if you go even further down, we've got the most new updated review and adoption cycle. This is something that as things come up, there's a general cycle, but think of it as like a draft where sometimes things need to be changed. Maybe the state changes their mind or changes their timeline too, and then we need to respond accordingly. And if you want, I can just email it to you and then we can figure out the link. And that is all I have on my report for today.
See no board questions, then thank you for that information. Oh, no. And then Terry, next on our agenda is our presentation from the music curriculum adoption process. Hi, Terry. Welcome.
Nice to see everyone. It's been a while since I've been here. Chair Lofald, school board members, superintendent, assistant superintendent. We have not met yet, so this is great. And directors who are here, thank you for your time. I'm going to give you a brief update of where we are at with the music adoption. And I just sent a link just to make sure that you have access to that so you can click on that. So we had a team of 15 teachers get together. One of them did include Chad Hansen. He's listed under general music courses, but Chad teaches at ALC. He is also at Chester Creek for a couple of music courses, also media. He's picking up a couple classes, and then AEO, wonderful teacher doing wonderful things. And I know that came up earlier about ALC, and it's just a great program that he's doing. So we got together a couple times so far this year working on researching, as you'll see in the next slide. A lot of hours went into this, a lot of their own time, after school, home time, prep time, lunch time to get together and just work on research. looking through the materials that we have now, looking at our inventory list, which takes hours and hours to do, and then meeting to really look at these different standards that we had options on. We talked about developing our own standards, the current standards and benchmarks that we have for Duluth. We looked at the new draft, the final draft that's in legislative law, at least the last that I knew, down in St. Paul. We also looked at the National Music Core Standards, and some of us have done quite a bit of work studying the different standards, and the team decided to work with the state standards. So that's probably what will be coming to you, coming to Director Nutlin and then to you with our recommendation. We're working on assessment maps right now. It takes a long time because when you look at the comparison of the 2008 standards, which I was part of that state team quite a few years ago, they're very different than the 2018 version, and there's many more standards for each grade level. In 2008, they were banded. So it was an elementary or a K-3, and then it was 4-5, and then I believe a middle school and a high school. So we have many more standards, at least for the elementary. And that's a lot of work for us with the number of students we have in our current schedules that we're working with. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. We're also revamping and looking at revamping those unit documents that we're using because we have so many more benchmarks we're going to need assessments for. I'm very thankful I have the team that I work with, very intelligent people, very committed to the students and their learning and their own teaching skills. So I'm excited. They've been excited to go through the work. We've struggled a bit with the budget that we're looking at. Last time we did an adoption, elementary received $146,000 for textbooks. We're not even looking at probably 3/4 of that for a K-12. And I've never been involved in a K-12 adoption before in the past. Throughout my career in Duluth, and this was my 30th year this year, last week, we've never done a K-12 music adoption before. So this is new and this is a lot of work for us. But like I said, it's been exciting work and we've been very thankful to meet the couple times that we have. And I'm hoping we'll meet one more time again as a team to look at when the materials come in and just finalize this list. We've also had the opportunity to receive some feedback from support staff in our district, the technology department. Multiple staff have been wonderful to work with. Both William House and Edie House. We worked, I call it the T tool, which is what we've been working with way back in the fall. I met with both of them to see how we could use that at the encouragement of Director Nutlin, which is great. And I think it was just coming to be as a document. So we were the first team that really looked at that document and had them both come into one of our meetings, the first training that we had to go through this material. And we continue to go through that. We're finding there's resources that we need to revamp and take out or add. And so I'm hoping that we can meet again with William Howe's support and some funding because that takes a lot of time to do as well. And we have a huge amount of literature, not only in our elementary series, but also just the octavos that we use in choral and then the printed music we use with band and orchestra. So we have our next steps. The documents are there for you to look at, especially those standards. We'll have more information at the April meeting that Director Nutlin will bring forward, and we're excited to have this opportunity. It's been a long time. So thank you so much for your time.
Questions for Ms. Ackervik? None? Member Oswald?
The entire music adoption committee, is that all of our music and people, or how many more? Who was left out? Because it seems like it's a lot of our music staff. So.
We have 20 people total,
Okay.
including me. We have a couple part-time people, including Chad Hansen, who I've mentioned before. And we left some people out. We had to cull that group down because of the budget that we had, we were working with. And you think of the team that works on adoption the same as we do PLCs, and really we have 2 high schools with 2 vocal people, so both of them needed to be at the table.
Sure.
Right. We did go back to our overall district-wide music committee that we have that has membership, and they represent all of the different groups.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Just so we're not banded our music program, so there's standards and benchmarks in kindergarten. I know you sent us that document, and I was looking at all of the different. Will there be an expectation for needed staff because of our state's kind of bigger amount of standards? Or do we have the music teachers in place that we need to make sure that we meet the benchmarks? Okay, yeah.
We have benchmarks at, I believe it's K-8 with the new standards, the draft that's coming out for 2018. They banded the high school for 9-12, and no, we never have enough staff to do the work that we need to do, especially music and the schedule that we have for elementary. This is going to be tricky.
So we're upping our benchmarks on the state level. They're upping the standards for each grade level.
Yes, they are. And I believe it's 21-22 or FY22. The expectation is that the school districts of Minnesota will have those implemented and working, and I believe that's the correct date. Yeah.
That's a good piece to know, that we're looking at year 21-22 or 22-23? 21-22.
I believe it's 21-22.
Okay.
On the website,
Okay.
MDE website, that's what it has listed. We're hoping to begin this work next school year, so FY19 or 20, FY20. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for coming. So now we move on to just information about grant applications. Again, as members of the board, we know that we will have two of them, both coming from Denfeld High School from Michael Meyer, and grants to support some groups and some things going on at Denfeld. He is a social worker at Denfeld, Mike Myers. So we have two grants that that are just in for submission. So it's not an approval; it's just an informational item.
I have a question on one of those.
Okay.
I was just curious what tiered fidelity inventory is, as that's what the first grant application was.
Great question. So the tiered fidelity inventory, what that does is our sites, what you do is when you're evaluating PBIS, this is a way that you evaluate the fidelity in which it's been implemented. So it's called the TFI for short. And in just a brief summary is what might happen is a person would go through, you might ask a student, you might ask a lunchroom person, you might ask a teacher on some different questions, and then you'd rate them on that, and that's how you come up with your TFI score. And so some interesting ways that you might end up using that data is you might take a look at your TFI score from year to year and say, oh, it's gone up or it's gone down. Why has that happened? You might then take a look at your staff and say, oh, wow, we've had a lot of staff turnover, therefore our PBS is not where it needs to be. Or maybe you didn't have high staff turnover, but maybe there was something else that happened. So it helps you drill down in your data to figure out what you need to do to support, retrain, and coach your staff to have a really good, positive environment at school.
So are all schools, do they all have the ability to do a TFI?
We do not have PBS at all of our schools, no. But we do work towards having positive behaviors at all schools.
So some schools that I know are doing PBIS-like things, they're not officially PBIS?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so
it's a process to go through.
Of our schools that are officially PBIS, are they going to be able to do TFIs?
Yep, they do that, and our climate coordinator, Ron Lake, does a really good job with them, and he meets with the PBS staff, and he does support them with that.
So why does Denfeld need some money to cover subs in order to do this?
In order to do the TFI, it takes time, and you need to do it during the school day. Mm-hmm. So I have not spoken to him specifically to this, but I'm going to infer that having a sub for the day to go out and ask these questions of staff is going to help ensure that we get really good, accurate data, so we can use that to inform whether it be professional development or anything else that we need to do.
And this can be done in other schools without needing $600?
I would have to look into that more.
All right.
Thank you. And now that moves us to our action items. And right now it's a policy. We're in our second reading of the school weapons policies. So right now on Tuesday, we would be looking at passing this policy and putting it in our policy updates. So if we have questions about that policy, let's talk it out now. Member Gorham.
I feel I recall some discussion about the employee who is a permit holder and just some of the circumstances around them being able to have it in the vehicle in the parking lot. I recall some discussion about looking at ways we could maybe strengthen this to make it more difficult so that wouldn't be potentially something that happens. And I'm not sure I saw changes with that language, so I just want to make sure that was addressed.
Yep. We don't, I believe one of our board members had said that they would get feedback to me on some ways that maybe that could possibly happen. I hadn't seen anything at this time, so I don't have any additions. If it is something that we want to slow down on and still wait for that feedback, we can definitely do that if that's what the board would like to do.
Member Oswald.
I'm looking on page 13 under number 5. And I seem to read A5 as recommendations to the superintendent for dismissal for a period of time not to exceed 1 year. And then the very next statement under B says, pursuant to Minnesota law, the student who brings a firearm as defined by federal law to school will be expelled for at least 1 year. So, which is it? That's my question. It seems to contradict itself.
If I can comment, I think that we have previously been advised that it's federal law for the minimum 1 year and there's nothing we can do about it. And so, I think that 5A5 needs to change, and then I don't know that the language is correct in 5B that the school board may modify this requirement. I don't think we can. That was my understanding.
I can concur with that understanding. I remember having conversations about that.
I can look into that, and I can make sure that it gets clarified and updated. Yep.
Member Gorham.
With those things noted, and I think some circumstances around just getting that information we were looking at with my previous comment, maybe it's prudent we just put the second reading on for April for this policy. That'd be my suggestion. Sound fair? Let's get it right.
Superintendent?
We can certainly do that. I was just going one farther and saying 5C then wouldn't make sense either if that were pursuant to the law, if it's required. So I think we need to review that whole section, perhaps asking our attorneys to look at that too. I know that this is MSBA language, but we need to get this right. I agree.
Member Oswald.
And I think that if we find that that is a fault of MSB language, that we should further have a discussion with MSB about correcting that.
Member Sandstead.
And I think that Member Gorham's suggestion that we hold this till next month so that we can get those fixes in place is a good one.
For sure. So we'll just direct our agenda setting chair and superintendent to not have that on our agenda. And then as board members, when our board book comes up, let's just do a quick glance too and make sure so that, you know, we do that before the meeting if we need to make sure it's not on our agenda, since we don't want to have unnecessary conversation. Superintendent.
It's actually already on the agenda, so at the meeting, you'll just hold it over.
And so how does that look? Let's talk that through, since I'm sure our chair will be back and she'll know it. But so if we're going to, when we make a movement, when we make a move to approve the agenda, is that where someone will make a motion to withdraw that? Member Sandstead.
You could either do it there or going through your report on the Education Committee. You could mention that we discussed it and decided it would be a good idea to postpone, and then somebody could make a motion at that point to definitely postpone it to April.
And it's a definite postponement?
Yeah.
And then our Tuesday night board meeting will have the opportunity to congratulate 3 recent diploma recipients, and their names are in our agenda board book, and we'll congratulate them on Tuesday night because they've met all the graduation requirements. So we have to accept that. And that really will be the conclusion of the Education Committee. Are there questions about our diploma receivers or anything else, Superintendent?
Just if you're going to definitely postpone 2A1, then you would also do 2A2, so that we don't. Yeah.
I just have a question on our graduates. Just will their graduation reflect a higher graduation rate from our 2018 graduation? Or where do our graduates that graduate during our school year, where does that get put into the records and then reflect in an end of the year type of document?
Those would be tracked in our 5-year and 6-year, 7-year graduation rates. So it goes back to that year's cohort, but at the 6-year rate. So it doesn't change the graduation rate for that particular year, but it's counted as a 6-year, 7-year. Am I correct, Dr. Lake? Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
That concludes the Education Committee report for today, or our meeting. So it looks like it's 10 to 4, and I'm looking back there going, what? But our clocks have not been adjusted. Well, that one is right. That one's, okay. Any questions, concerns? Thank you. Thank you, thank you. See you tomorrow.